and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the Magu family massacre and the mystery that played through till the end and that still continues to this day. So let's meet our family today. Paul Magu was a distinguished lawyer. He was married to Lydia Wangui, a businesswoman and also a stay-at-home mom. Together they had 3 children: Alan 9 years old, Ryan 8 years old, Tiffany 5 years old. And they were living around Pipeline Estate, and with them lived a househelp, Margaret. Their marriage was described as a happy, loving, peaceful union. Family members even said that the pair were held in high regard, a kind of role model to other family members. Everyone wanted, their marriages to be like theirs. From outside looking in, everything was perfect, successful, happy family, quite the Kenyan dream. But quite often we find that not all is as it seems. Nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors. November 23rd, 2014. The day started as normal. It was just a normal, ordinary day. Paul Magu woke up earlier than the family. He took his breakfast, then headed back to his bedroom. Later, he would reappear, this time with Lydia. They were talking as they head to the living area. It's quite just a normal morning, and it continued as normal essentially. After breakfast, Paul sent Margaret to the shop to buy sodas, so she headed out while leaving the rest of the family home. She bought the sodas and then returned with them. And at that, Paul took one of the sodas and then headed back to his room. Margaret continued with her daily chores as usual, but this time she noticed that Lydia wasn't around. And Lydia was at her house. She was a stay-at-home mom, so she would be seen around at least to supervise Margaret. She was running the house essentially, so she noticed this, but it really didn't bother her that much, so she just left it at that. Margaret then went into the compound, to continue her chores, to do some more work out in the yard. When she was out there, Paul approached her, and then while still on the phone with someone, after he ends the call, he then sends Margaret for some porridge flour. So basically he said, here's the money, head to the market, bring some porridge flour. So he sends her again, and remember, this is the second time he's sending Margaret. And Margaret, in response to what to being sent, she wanted to check in with Lydia first, because she was in charge. She wanted to inform her that she would be heading out all the way to town to bring porridge flour, but Paul told her it was not necessary and that Lydia had left for prayers with a family friend. But Margaret, didn't really push the matter. She prepared herself and then headed out to town to buy the porridge flour. She bought it, then returned. When she got there, she noticed that, it's been several hours later, but that Lydia wasn't back. So while working around the house, Margaret would later report that she overheard Paul telling Tiffany that she couldn't speak to her mother, Lydia, as she would be returning home late. The little girl had been asking, for her mother, so she was told that she wouldn't be able to speak to her. So Margaret took a note of this. She definitely took a note of this, that Lydia wasn't even back. Her child is crying here, and then Paul says that Lydia wouldn't be returning home early. At night, Lydia still didn't return on that day, but the family continued with their normal night routine. As according to Paul, they were expecting Lydia that same day, but late at night. So they continued with the normal, usual night routine. So everyone took their dinner, with the exception of Paul. Paul didn't eat that night. He didn't. And you have to take a note of this. He didn't eat the first night. 2 days went by and Lydia still wasn't back. And at this time, I think everyone in the family was getting a bit concerned. Because where's Lydia? It's not like prayers take 48 hours. I mean, even if you prayed, you'd still come back or call the family to let them know where you are. But Lydia didn't return. During the 2 days, Margaret would later say that Paul never took any of his meals. She made breakfast, he didn't take any. She made dinner, she made lunch, he didn't take any of his meals. And also during that time that Lydia had gone missing, Margaret at this time had noticed a burnt out area in the parking space out in the compound. She thought it odd that someone would burn something right there because they never did burn anything there. So they had a designated place in the compound if they wanted to do that. To her, she thought that maybe Paul had some trash to burn. He didn't know where to burn it, so he just used the parking space just right there to burn something. That same burnt out spot in the parking area would later be described as being in the shape of a person lying on their back. That would be later after the investigation, but Margaret took note of it that there was a burnt out area in the parking space, and she thought it odd at that time, but really didn't think much about it as anything sinister really. November 25th, 2014, Paul woke up that day and then asked Margaret to prepare the kids as he had somewhere to go with them. Margaret rushed to prepare them. He was really in a hurry, so Margaret really didn't do the normal morning routine for the children. He just rushed them out and they went. Tiffany would be described as being very happy that day. She was excited for the trip with her father. Definitely thought they were going someplace nice. 2 hours would pass, after they left the home. 2 hours would pass and Paul would return, but this time he would return without the children. And then after that, he left the home, leaving Margaret behind. It's unclear whether he actually told Margaret where the kids were, where he had taken them. It's unclear, but he left the house and then he drove all the way to his parents' home in Thika. He got there at around 4 p.m. At this time, Lydia's family were definitely concerned. Lydia wasn't really answering any calls. She had gone silent completely. So Lydia's brother called Margaret to ask her why Lydia's phone was off and why she wasn't answering anyone. And she was told by Margaret that Lydia had gone to prayers with a family friend and wasn't back yet. So that was it. That was the family, that's the only information they had about Lydia, really. Back at Paul's home, his parents' home, the father was at the farm. He was at the farm. He was doing some work there, and Paul got there and offered to help his father, and they worked together at the farm a little, and then they brought in firewood for about 3 times. At the 3rd time, though, he told his dad that he was tired and he hadn't eaten for 2 days. So his father, left him at the house, left him behind, thinking that he would probably rest before they cooked dinner later. But Paul didn't stay behind, after his father left. He followed his father to the farm, and then he started acting very strange. He would pace back and forth on the farm, and his father definitely noticed this. He asked him about it, but Paul said he was just fine. There was nothing wrong with him. So they returned home at around 6 p.m. and Paul's dad prepared dinner for him, but he declined to eat again. Remember, this is now the 3rd day that Paul hasn't eaten anything. Definitely a bit significant. Please do note that. He then left at around 7 p.m. on foot, told his father that he was going to attend a Harambe and that some of his friends would pick him up, and he would return home later with the friends. So he went out walking, leaving his car behind. He returned home at around 11 p.m., covered in mud. His clothes were wet, he was covered in mud. The father definitely thought it quite odd, and he asked Paul what had happened, and Paul told his father that he had been mugged by some people and that they had taken off with his phone. So the father thought that that was it. He had been mugged. It was definitely a bit strange, but he didn't really press the matter, and they headed to bed. The father would later say that Paul that night didn't sleep. He kept screaming and talking and shouting throughout the night to himself. He didn't sleep that night. Definitely the father was worried and concerned for his son. Early the next morning, Paul's brother woke up and then went to buy breakfast. When he returned, he entered the home and he found Paul wearing his mother's skirt and blouse. And the dad was definitely confused. Why was Paul behaving like this? First, it was yesterday pacing at the farm, came back covered in mud, and now he's wearing his mother's blouse and skirt. He was confused and he got furious. He was confused and then he got a bit furious. He ordered Paul to remove the skirt and the blouse and told him to wear some trousers. And Paul did just that. He changed and then left without telling his father, without even having breakfast. He just left without telling his father where he was going. At this, the dad got concerned and called Paul's brothers to intercept him before he reached home. And they wanted to see what was wrong with him. Was he okay? So the brothers rushed there, but unfortunately they passed each other along the journey. They were not able to meet up with Paul. The brothers got all the way to their parents' house, but then again, after that, they then started making their way to Paul's home to find him and see if he was okay, what was going on with him. Still, this was going on. The father also, his dad, Paul's dad, tried calling Lydia, but she didn't answer her phone. So she thought something was definitely off here. Paul is acting very strange, and Lydia wasn't really answering anyone's calls. Brothers rushed to Paul's home, but they didn't find anyone there. They only found Margaret, the family members, all of the family members. They didn't find any of them in the house, and definitely they knew something was wrong. So they started looking for all of them. And here it's when they discovered that Lydia had gone missing, and they reported it to the police. So they all started searching for Lydia. Then the search began right away. Now, when the news started going on around that Lydia was missing, the family friend Anne, the one who was supposed to be with Lydia, Anne called Margaret, and she told her that she was on her way there and that they should go look in the bedroom. They should definitely check the bedroom. Why the bedroom, she didn't say. She got to the house and then convinced the family that they should go and check the bedroom. When they got there, when they entered the bedroom, everything was in place. Nothing seemed out of place, but it's when they closely checked, they spotted blood. Blood was on the walls a bit, and there was also bone fragments and a tooth there in the bedroom. So they got concerned. They continued searching for the family with the hopes of finding them alive, but with definitely at the back of their minds that they know that this may not be so. So in their searches, they decided to look in hospitals and mortuaries for any leads, and that's when they discovered that Lydia's body had been found. It was in the mortuary. Her body was found along Kiambu Road, and the remains had been burnt. And when the body was first located, the police thought that she could have been a victim of a car accident. But after, realizing that the remains looked burned or had been burned, they classified it as a homicide. And when it was connected finally, after the family identified Lydia's body, it was connected to Paul's home. It gave them a lead to start working on. So it was a manhunt for Paul, and it was a search for the kids, and already Lydia had been identified. So as the search was going on for the kids, and also Paul, remember, he had left his father's home, but he didn't go home. So where was he? After he left his father's home, he had driven his vehicle onto Thika superhighway. He got out. When he got there, he got out, leaving his car running by the side of the road. He then walked into traffic. Now, while crossing, he was run over by a bus that was heading to Garissa, and that's where he lost his life. The bus driver would later describe Paul's behavior as odd. He said that Paul got onto the path of the bus when the bus was so near, it was so close to him, and if you're crossing, he would have known that it was so close, but he just walked right into the path of the bus and he was knocked over, almost as if he wanted to get hit by the bus. People who saw Paul walk onto the traffic, they saw him walking with a white jerrycan. Some theorized that he could have been crossing to get some gas, but then again he left his car running. So right then and there, Paul had been found. He had been run over and he had lost his life. Now remember, the family they're still getting all of this news all at once. Lydia already identified as dead. Paul is suspected as the murderer of his wife, right? Paul is now run over by a bus. Where are the kids? The kids are still missing. So they're still looking for the kids. Paul was collected and his body was taken his body was taken to be examined. Police now still looking for the children, and also learning about Lydia's and Paul's deaths. They went to the home to gather further evidence. While there, they discovered the blood spatter and the bone fragments. They also discovered a prayer room, which in it had some materials, like a book by Karen Rose, You Belong to Me. And it looked as if someone was reading it, and they assumed it was Paul, but they don't know who read the book. So the book tells of a story, the book by Karen Rose, You Belong to Me. It tells of a story of a young woman who was assaulted, and onlookers did nothing to help her. So later she went on she would go on a revenge mission, and she killed all the witnesses by decapitating their bodies. They also found DVDs, books on curses, misery, and wealth. They also found a note which read as, I cannot live in ridicule and embarrassment as a result of poverty, let it be. It is theorized that Paul was the one to write this note, and possibly they think it could be part of his motive for this strange behavior and the strange things around this case. The mystery about the prayer room and everything in it and the materials found in it, like the books about curses and misery and wealth, they thought that it could be that the murders, Paul had murdered his wife as a ritualistic sacrifice. So they thought that he had done all of this as a sacrifice. And also remember, he hadn't taken any meals. So people theorized that maybe he was trying to get something to work in his favor using the murders as a sacrifice. But it's not clear. That is what was theorized there. The note could indicate about poverty, but we don't know. We don't know even who wrote the note, but it was found there. So the police analyzed the burnt out area and they theorized that Paul had attacked Lydia that morning on the 23rd, and then he brought out the body and tried to burn it. But since he wasn't able to, he had put the body in a gunny bag to dispose of it the next day. Now here we're not told when and how, if at all, Paul left the house within those 2 days. We're not told when he dumped the body. We don't know when he dumped the body, but it's theorized by the police that he was the one who did it. He dumped Lydia's body after, ending her life. Now, since we're not told when he disposed of the body near Kiambu Road, I would wonder if that is the case and he never left within those 2 days until the day he took out the children out for a short trip. I would wonder if he did stay with the body either in the car or in the room, and that's quite a little bit disturbing, but that's what you get from this here, that he stayed with it. If he didn't leave, it's not clear when he disposed of the body. After they collected all they needed, they turned their efforts to finding the children. But days would go by until some farmers in Tatu City Garden would inform the police after having discovered the body of a child. This would later be confirmed as to be the body of little Tiffany, so they turned their attention to finding the little boys. But at this point, it was clear to the family that the possibility of finding the boys alive wasn't there at all, because now they've found little Tiffany. Now, I don't know why the whole place wasn't searched, because if it was searched, they would have found the bodies of the boys, but they didn't. It was only later that they were alerted by a security guard to the location of the bodies. It was only later when a security guard, drawn by a foul smell, he would go to investigate and he would find the bodies in a bush. The police rushed there, collected the bodies and processed the scene there. Then they tried to piece everything together. Now, when the bodies were collected, they found that the bodies had been acid had been thrown on the bodies of the children, as well as anointing oil. Now, it's unclear why, if at all Paul did this to his children, why he would pour the acid and the anointing oil. It was theorized that the anointing oil could mean that he was hurt by the whole situation he had put his children through, and he had poured anointing oil on them. But then again, it could be tied to the ritualistic sacrifice that most people are actually theorizing it could be connected to. The acid could be theorized that he wanted to disfigure the bodies of the children, that they wouldn't be discovered. So let's look at the timeline according to what they found. 23rd November 2014, after Paul sent Margaret to the shop, he attacked Lydia, his wife, and then tried to burn the body and then put the body in a sack for disposal. When and how he disposed the body is unknown. Paul then wiped down the bedroom to get rid of the blood and everything in it, and then after that he didn't take any of his meals. And this is where the ritualistic reference is still in there, but let's stick to the timeline. He then offered prayers with Anne, the family friend who was supposed to be with Lydia, remember? She came and they offered prayers in the prayer room. They remained in contact until the very end. 25th November 2014, he then went on a trip with his children. Here it is suspected that he drove to Tatu City Garden, where he brutally murdered his 3 children and then placed their bodies in different locations. He then poured acid on the bodies to disfigure them so that maybe he could get away with the murder, and he then poured anointing oil on them as well. Paul then returns home after 2 hours, then goes to his father's place. He behaves bizarrely while there, and then his phone was found, and it was found in a pond. He had thrown it into a pond. It is theorized he tried to throw it to destroy it so that the location couldn't be found. He was trying to get away with the murders. On the 26th, he left his father's home and then he drove to Thika Superhighway. He exited his car and then walks onto the path of a bus. And then he was run over. It is theorized that he did this to end his own life after realizing the gravity of what he had done to the rest of his family members. It's theorized that he took his own life in this manner. So to the police, it was clear it was a murder-suicide encouraged by ritualistic sacrifices. So they thought he was inspired by rituals and he did this to the family. And Paul was the person who did this, who murdered his own family. So what emerged during the investigation was that this was possibly a premeditated murder. One of the neighbors told the police that Paul had asked her whether she would take care of his children if anything were to happen to him. Maybe Paul here, wanted to possibly end his own life and leave the children alone, but he changed his mind later. So it's theorized that he could have been planning this for quite a while. So while investigating, the name that came up the most multiple times was that of Anne Wamboi Nyoro, the family friend who was supposed to be with Lydia, remember? So what did Anne have to do with the mysterious deaths? What did she do? What did she know? And who is Anne? So let's look at Anne here. Pastor Anne Wamboi Nyoro was introduced to the Magus through Paul's mother. They then connected and a friendship blossomed between them. Now, however, this did not remain the same for Paul's mother, as she later ended the relationship with Anne because of a peculiar event that happened at her church. Anne had been invited to preach at this church, and apparently some members of the church had fallen sick during Anne's sermon. So this didn't seem okay, or didn't seem quite right with Paul's mother, and for that she thought Anne was different and she didn't want to associate with her anymore. So she ended that relationship. But Paul and Anne remained friends. They became even very good friends after that. Paul's mother would later talk about the relationship, that it seemed more than that of friends. It seemed as if they were involved with each other more than a friendship, really. That was what Paul's mother thought about their relationship later, really. Another source described that Paul had even helped Anne, move from teaching to pastoring. That initially Anne was a teacher, but then again Paul would pay for Anne's fees to study theology, and he would help her to become a pastor. And another source also says that he would even go to the extent of paying for Anne's son school fees. He would help Anne a lot. And at this point, Paul became very dedicated to Pastor Anne's church. He would be very dedicated to it. And apparently Anne was a constant visitor. Later, the secretary would testify in an inquest that Anne was a constant visitor to the office and would be seen by the secretary visiting the office several times. The secretary would also describe a day when Paul had asked her not to come in to the office, and he had given the excuse that the office was being fumigated, and the secretary accepted it. She thought it odd, but she accepted it and stayed away. But out of curiosity, she went to the office and didn't find any signs of fumigation, and she thought that Paul had wanted her out of the office. Now, it's unclear here whether Pastor Anne visited the office during those days. Anne and Paul went on several trips together. Even sometimes Lydia would tag along with the pair to go to various places, and they would visit Nigeria to get anointing oil for the church. Why all the way up to Nigeria? They could have shipped it, but I don't know. They went all the way to Nigeria to collect, the anointing oil. And his passport, which was discovered in the car, had several stumps of him going on those trips together with Anne. Anne had even a place in the home, in the Magu's home. She had her own room, and she was a frequent visitor there. Margaret would say that she would often come to the house, stay for a number of days, and would offer prayers with the family for several days. She was there. So this relationship with Anne really didn't sit well with the rest of the family members. They described Paul as being Paul had changed when he met Anne, and they described him as being disengaged with the rest of the family. He even stopped checking in on the family, his parents. He didn't visit home. He didn't visit home at all. It was all about their relationship there. It was the family friend, the pastor, the person who would visit their home frequently. Now let's get on to the last days as to where Anne comes into the story. So on to the last days. Anne was at the home for 3 days before everything went down. Before even Lydia went missing, she was at the house. And as well as she had also been in constant communication. Even after Lydia went missing, she had been communicating with Paul. She had, visited the home to offer prayers again, and then she was the one who alerted everyone about the bedroom. So that's how she's suspected of being connected. So Anne is suspected of helping Paul with the murders. She's suspected of helping to get rid of Lydia's body. She's also suspected being involved with the children's disappearance, and also being the one who encouraged Paul to take his own life, because she was in constant communication with Paul. So that's why Anne comes in. Anne, when she was arrested, she wasn't really cooperative. When she was asked a question about the family or how she's involved in the whole thing, she would pause for a second, ask for pause, and she would pray. Instead of answering the question, she would start praying, and she would pray forever. I mean, she hasn't been really cooperative. She hasn't talked, and at this point I haven't seen any report that said she has said anything, so we really don't know. And she's the only person who knows what really happened to the Magus. She's the only one who's left alive that knows what really happened to the Magus. So I'm hoping she talks and gives us an insight, but at this point this is where this case remains technically solved and unsolved at the same time. Solved because we know who did the murders, unsolved because we still don't know what really happened. Why did Paul do this? What was his reason for doing this? It is suspected by the family members that Paul, after meeting Anne, he had dedicated so much of his wealth to the church that he became poor, and he had even quit his job as a lawyer to focus on spirituality. He had given half of his wealth to the church, and he also wanted to transfer some of the properties he had to Anne. So I don't know what was up with that, but it is suspected that after he did all that, he became poor, and he didn't know how to help his family again. And he didn't want to go back to to his former days when he was poor. He didn't have anything, so he did this as a form of saving his family. Really, I don't know if that is the case, but it is suspected that possibly either one is the ritualistic sacrifices, number two, possibly it was just money, poverty.
I think that poverty for me sounds more, as a possible theory, definitely sounds a bit more, it makes more sense to me. And I think that everything, when you put everything together, it points to that. And I think that Paul was at a place where he gave out a lot, and he didn't know how to get himself out of that situation. He didn't know how to recover. He didn't have the help that he needed. He didn't seek out help to maybe advise him on how better to handle the situation. He felt that he was backed into a corner and there was no coming out of that place, and he felt that the only way to save his family from being the laughing stock of the community, or from embarrassment as he put it, was to get rid of them, and it was definitely a poor decision because it all ended up in tragedy and him trying to get away with the murders. It definitely wasn't the right decision for him to do, but I think in his mental state at that point, he saw that that was the end. He was poor, he didn't have anything to his name, he had left his practice, he wasn't a lawyer anymore, his finances were drained, he had nothing. And being the sole provider of his family, how was he going to provide for them? That was what was going on through his mind. What was he going to tell people? How is he going to stand in front of people? How is he going to support his wife and children? And I think that really pulled him towards a very bad direction. And I think he did this as a last resort. He thought that he didn't have support, he didn't have anywhere to turn to, and he felt trapped. He felt like this was the end, and he just resorted to doing this. That's what I think happened. But definitely I know that there is a lot of stress, especially on men, when it comes to being the sole provider. And definitely I would urge people, when you're getting into relationships, definitely, whether you're a man or a woman, try to help each other out in terms of your finances. Try to be more open in terms of seeking out help when you're in a bad situation in terms of your finances. Definitely try to seek out help. And in terms of also women, men and women, both of you should try and contribute to the family, so that one person is not the only sole provider for the whole family. Definitely seek out help when you need it. Seek out help. There's help out there. And also I think that this is also a case of being brainwashed by religion. And I'm not saying religion is bad or anything. I'm just saying that there are certain aspects of what is so-called religion that aren't really good for you, or this type of institutions that are there, they're not necessarily out to seek out the truth. Some of them just barely, that they're just merely they're just there to merely manipulate people into doing all sorts of things. Financial gain is their end. And it sadly happens in this country, as we've seen also very recently in the the massacre that has just happened. You definitely, I would say, just be careful what you get yourself into. Don't give out too much until you're poor and you don't have anything to your name. Just be careful what you do or what you get yourself involved with. Be careful out there, because most of this are just there for power and money. So just be careful out there.